Alright guys, let's talk about one of the most brutal and pivotal battles of World War II, the Battle of Stalingrad. This thing lasted from August 23, 1942 to February 2, 1943. 6 months of absolute hell on earth. So as the Germans advanced towards Stalingrad in the summer of 1942, the war suddenly came home to the locals living in the city. We're not talking about distant battles anymore. This was literally in their backyards. Evacuation of civilians was slowed to the speed of the German advance. Basically, people couldn't get out fast enough because the Germans were coming so quickly. Families were trapped, trying to flee but having nowhere to go. Now here's something crucial to understand. Because the city bore Stalin's name, it was of massive importance to the morale of Soviet forces to hold it. Stalin himself took this personally. Losing a city named after him, that was completely unacceptable. So the order came down, hold Stalingrad at all costs. The desperation of Soviet resistance to the German advance was absolutely clear to everyone. Work frantically continued in the weapon factories even as battles raged nearby. T-34 tanks could be seen being rushed into battle completely unpainted and sometimes even lacking gun sights. Yeah, you heard that right. Tanks without proper aiming equipment. That's how desperate things were. They'd roll these tanks straight off the factory floor and drive them directly into combat. Men who weren't already in the Red Army were quickly formed into militia units and sent straight into battle. And get this, sometimes they went without proper training. We're talking about factory workers and office clerks being handed rifles and told to go fight professional German soldiers. The casualties among these poorly trained militia were absolutely horrific. Women and children weren't just sitting around either. They dug trenches and built protective fortifications throughout the city. But they didn't stop there. Women also fought as machine gunners, served in gun crews, and worked as scouts and snipers. The Soviets threw absolutely everything they had into this fight. On September 12th, the first German troops moved into the city itself. The battle was about to get even more intense. The Germans chose to attack straight into the urban area, figuring they could use their superior tactics and training to quickly overwhelm the defenders. But they soon found themselves in absolutely brutal close quarters, house-to-house battles. This wasn't the kind of warfare the Germans excelled at. Their blitzkrieg tactics that worked so well in open terrain were useless here. The Soviets came up with a clever strategy. They established frontline positions as close as possible to the German lines. Sometimes Soviet and German soldiers were in buildings right across the street from each other, or even on different floors of the same building. Why do this? Because it was actually the safest place to be from German air and artillery attacks. German planes and artillery couldn't bomb positions that were right next to their own troops without risking friendly fire. In August, Stalin had sent his top general, Georgy Zhukov, to supervise the whole southern front. Meanwhile, Vasily Chuikov took over command of the 62nd Army actually fighting inside the city. While Zhukov prepared for a massive counteroffensive, Chuikov pushed his troops into relentless combat. When someone asked Chuikov how he interpreted his task, he gave a response that's become legendary. We will defend the city or die in the attempt. And he meant every word of it. Reinforcements were constantly being ferried under heavy fire across the Volga River into the ruins of the city. Not all the troops made it to the other side. Many were killed by German artillery and aircraft during the crossing. But enough got through to keep at least part of the city in Soviet hands. Soviet casualties were immensely high. We're talking thousands upon thousands of men dying every single day. But German casualties were mounting as well. The Germans were getting chewed up in this urban meat grinder. To ensure the defense of Stalingrad and prevent retreats, Stalin had issued Order No. 227 on July 27, 1942. This order became known by a chilling phrase, "Not one step backwards." Here's how brutal this was. Soviet armies had a second line of barrier troops positioned behind the frontline soldiers. These barrier troops acted as a last line of defense, but their real job was to shoot any Soviet soldiers who tried to retreat without orders. Yeah, you could die from the Germans in front of you or from your own side behind you. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Officers and soldiers who deserted or retreated without permission could also be sent to penal battalions. Being assigned to a penal battalion was basically a virtual death sentence. These units were given the most dangerous missions with almost no chance of survival. Red Army troops built an elaborate maze of trenches through damaged buildings and even used the source system to sneak past enemy positions. The fighting was incredibly creative and brutal. Both sides employed snipers extensively, and the destroyed buildings of Stalingrad made it an ideal environment for cover and concealment. You could hide anywhere, shoot from anywhere. The most famous Soviet sniper, celebrated as a national hero, was Vasily Zaitsev. This guy had 225 confirmed kills. That's 225 German soldiers taken out one bullet at a time. There's even a movie about him called Enemy at the Gates. At the end of September and in mid-October, the Germans came really close to victory. They had captured most of the city and pushed the Soviets back to narrow strips of land along the Volga River. But somehow, the Soviet defenders clung onto parts of the city, particularly in the northern factory district. The German advance into Stalingrad brought other serious problems for the Axis forces that Hitler hadn't considered. Hitler had fired several of his top generals during the summer after heated arguments over his strategic plans. Now he was making many major command decisions himself, which turned out to be a terrible idea. Hitler was no military genius, despite what he thought. As fall turned to winter, the cold became a major factor. The brutal Russian winter caused serious problems for both sides, breaking down tanks and making weapons more difficult to operate. However, the Red Army had way better clothing for the freezing cold conditions. Soviet soldiers had quilted